Enter the world of the paranormal with us, here at Paranormal M. We invite you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a single mysterious story. Buckle up and get ready for a ride you won't forget. Typical haunted hotel room. While we were in Bali in February this year, we stayed at a villa resort near Bali's airport. I don't really want to expose the name, but I'll just hint it's one of the resorts super near the airport, in case anybody wants to Google it and see how the room looks like to understand my story better. We were assigned to a 2-story room, the living room in the first floor and the door connecting to one of the bedrooms with its own shower and toilet. The second floor is a bedroom on its own with 3 doors, one leading to the balcony, one to a room with a toilet bowl, and the other to the bathroom. There's also a door at the top of the stairs leading to the second floor and a stairwell itself, and it's narrow. I did feel a weird, eerie presence when I entered the room, but it's probably my mind playing tricks on me since I watched some horror on the plane, and also because I thought I'd be sleeping alone in such a large room. My mother and father slept at the first floor, 'cause they're kinda old, my mom being 57 and my dad being 67, so they told me to sleep on the second floor since they don't want to climb up the stairs a lot. The first and second night, I slept on the second floor. I was with my cousin, who joined us last minute. On the second day in Bali, I had a fight with my family and ran upstairs and locked the door. My mother and cousin came running up to tell me and open up. I thought they just wanted to argue with me more, but thinking back, they sounded kind of frantic or worried. You'll understand why later. Fast forward to my third night. My cousin left, and it was our last night in the hotel, so I was packing and getting ready for bed. Alone, on the second floor. The temperature was colder than usual, although it remained the same throughout the stay, and I didn't drink anything cold, so I was already getting suspicious. Suddenly, I just got this vibe that I was being watched, and I just got paranoid. Take note, I didn't see anything. It's just like this gut feeling. I kept imagining faces in the curtains. Not long later, while watching videos on my iPad, I heard one of the cabinets in the end of the room make a thud, like something from the inside of the cabinet knocked on the door. I immediately took the blankets, which were all really pretty heavy by the way, and my pillow. In typical teenage me, I obviously grabbed my phone too and ran downstairs. The blankets and pillows were in front of my face when I carried them, so it doesn't drag on the floor. While running down, I managed to close the door leading up to the second floor, and since most of my front view was blocked by the blanket and pillow, while closing the door, I was looking towards the ground, and I saw a white sheet inside the room on the ground. I thought it was another pillow that fell on the ground while I closed the door, but when I reached the first floor, I realized the pillow was too tall to be a pillow, so obviously I thought it was a cliché ghost in white. That night I slept in my living room sofa, and in my dream I dreamt about this woman in Balinese clothing, dancing with an eerie smile on her face. Somehow I can imagine images of a woman in white with long hair in the second floor room. Now this dream could be linked to the fact I was scared and all, and it's just in my mind doing that and not the ghost showing me. In the morning my mom asked what I was doing down there, and I told her what happened. And when she told me, she and my cousin experienced it as well. Apparently on the first day when my cousin first arrived, hours after we checked in, she immediately felt the presence on the second floor. She said while I was out surfing, she was alone in the room. She saw a woman in white at the corner of her eye. She then started praying and asked the ghost in Indonesian to leave her alone. My mother's experience, she said, she was walking upstairs to grab clothes for my suitcase. she saw a black figure dart across the door to the second floor. It was also her first time entering the second floor, and she felt the presence too. After she took her clothes, she went back down the stairs without closing the door, and while walking down, she said she felt someone push her. It was a light push, she said, and it felt like someone used 2 fingers on one shoulder blade. She said she grabbed onto the railing and looked back and saw the same black figure dart across the floor. She then explained when I locked myself in the room after the fight, they were worried I would have encountered the spirit, since they were afraid it was an evil one, because it did try to push my mom down the stairs. I've all seen my dead grandmother before, which leads them to think I have a third eye, which makes them even more worried because the shock from seeing a ghost could lead me to faint or something. So that same morning, I obviously had to go back up with my mom this time to go get my luggage and all the other electronics I left. And she opened the cabinet and heard a thud from in there. And there's nothing in there. No fridge, no items that could have fallen over that caused the sound. Also, the TV was suddenly off to the left, with it on. Could have been on a timer, though. The Bible and Quran on the vanity that the hotel provided was facing in a different way. And probably some of my belongings were moved too, and I just didn't realize it. After we checked out, my mom revealed one more thing, that when we were taking the luggage that morning, she went to the second floor bedroom to take my toiletries for me, and she saw the figure itself clear as day. In a white dress, frizzy mid-length hair, and a wide smile on its face, standing at the corner of the bathtub. She said she kept quiet because we had to check out and didn't want to say anything to freak me out or delay our packing up process. And also, she won't give the ghost any attention at all. My mom said the ghost wasn't evil and was just cheeky and naughty. I don't know how she knew this, though. I obviously tried to do some research on this place, like where was this hotel built and built on, but nothing came up, no graveyard or anything. So I have no clue where this ghost even came from. How can I tell if a doll is haunted? For a little background, I'm an 18-year-old female, and I live with my 80-year-old great-grandmother. And as you can probably tell from the title, my great-great-grandmother, let's call her Nana for short, collect porcelain or glass dolls, whatever you want to call them. She picks them up at a thrift store. Every time she goes, it's just about the only thing she buys. As a result of this, she then winds up keeping them in old wicker laundry baskets and random places all around the house. One being the size of an atheist 7-year-old child. She goes by the name Anastasia. The rest don't really have names. Nana normally calls the others doll or some random name that she comes with that changes every time. Well, anyways, since she's been collecting these dolls, I've been getting feelings of dread and sadness, especially around the one called Anastasia. The feelings have gotten worse since my Nana has dropped and broke her foot, her hand, while moving her into the dining room about 3 months ago. Since then, when I leave my room at night and go past the living room or dining room, the feeling gets worse. I asked my Nana if she had felt it, and she said in good old-fashioned elderly talk, "I'm just imagining it, and I need to go pray to God." She said the same thing when I told her I saw white hands follow me into the bathroom one night. That's happened twice. What's finally made me decide to post this is my cat was looking at my window and doing a low growl while something was pecking at it. I've tried sage and salt, but it only made stuff worse. So, if anyone can help me with this, I would really appreciate it. I love the supernatural, and I have some more encounters from other family members I'll post later. And I'll add a picture of the dolls in the morning, since it's night where I live, and I don't want to leave my room. Saw a fairy. Am I alone? For about a month, I wandered out of the backwoods and by the river because, according to the book, fairies like to hang out around water and leave little notes written in the supposed language, along with other little gifts and offerings. I'd make them little leaf baskets, leave them candy or flowers, things like that. I even recited a chant. Yeah, I know. I think part of me knew it was silly and that I'd probably never get the results, but damn if I wasn't determined, so I kept on. At one point, my gifts and notes started disappearing from the bench I left them on. I figured it was wind or birds taking it, but a small part of me hoped it was something else. A month of this nonsense, and I was getting very discouraged. I decided to leave a few more gifts for them, and this time I weighed them down with small rocks so they wouldn't blow away, and I'd know for sure. A day went by, and my gifts were still there. Another day, same thing. Then on the third day of checking, I found the gifts gone, but the rocks still there. Only the rocks moved around. I don't remember how soon after that this happened, but eventually, I got what I had wanted. I wandered out into the woods and saw by the river 2 monarch butterflies. They were very large, and I wanted to see them up close. However, one landed on the bench close to the path where I was standing, and I noticed this butterfly had limbs, tiny, thin, pale limbs, hands and feet. I stopped dead in my tracks and looked hard to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. It was broad daylight, and I could see very clearly. It wasn't a butterfly, it was a fairy. She had long, thin brown hair that went down past her feet, and a blue dress that looked like a small scrap of fabric. But what terrified me above all else was her face. Her eyes were giant black bug alien-like eyes, but she definitely had a face, and she definitely saw me. I didn't even try to go look at the other one because I ran. I was so scared that I bolted home and locked my door. After freaking out and keeping an eye on the backyard, the backwoods, through the window, I went back. No surprise, they were gone, and I never saw them again. Despite me trying over and over again, my gifts were never taken. I felt sad and stupid because I felt like I ruined my chance to have fairy friends. But knowing what I do now, it was probably a blessing they left me alone. What do you guys think? Has anyone else ever seen a fairy? And did they look like this? I just need to find someone else who has seen what I've seen. It's something I'll never forget. I remember her so clearly I could draw her. Ghost on the Intercom. Some context. When I was in my early teens, I believe I was followed by the spirit of a young girl. I believe she inhabited one of my porcelain dolls my grandmother had given me. Often I'd see her in dreams or feel her presence. I can't explain it, but I feel like she may have been the ghost in this particular story. My parents used to live in a big 3-story house that had an old built-in intercom. There were speakers in every room of the house, minus the bathrooms. And even though it was old, we still liked playing around with it every now and then. You'd have to have the speaker turned on and turn the volume all the way up, usually to even hear anything clearly. You also have to physically push a button to speak into it. Once in a while, the intercom would come on by itself and play something on the radio. I found this spooky, but my mom brushed it off, as the past owner having set an alarm via the intercom, so that the radio would come on during certain times. We didn't know how to reprogram it. Hard as my stepdad tried, and my parents were tired of often getting woken up at 3 a.m. by the radio randomly coming on through the intercom into their room. So we decided to just not use it anymore and turned off all the intercoms. with the volume all the way down, just as an extra measure. One night I was chatting online with my friends on the computer, and I hadn't noticed the time was around 3 a.m. Suddenly, the intercom came on in my room at full blast. It was horribly loud and static coming through. I jumped up to shut it off, but as I reached for the volume dial, I saw it was already at 0 or off. I didn't know how to make the noise stop. Then through the static, I faintly heard what sounded like someone breathing. And then I heard the voice of a little girl. She said, "When will you come to your senses?" And then just as fast as it had came on, the intercom shut off. Silence. I was frozen with fear. Being a teen, I jumped back on the computer to tell my friends what had happened, and they said, "Get out of that house." I had to go tell my parents. The hallway was pitch black, and I had to go all the way down a big staircase in the dark to their room. I held my breath and flung my door open, sprinting down the stairs, crying from how scared I was. I banged loudly on my parents' door, and I heard my mom yelp. She opened the door, and I ran in to tell them what had happened. They were more upset I woke them up. My mom told me it was probably just a commercial on the radio or something. I mentioned how my intercom had been turned off with the volume down to 0, and also what kind of commercial would say something like that. Seeing as it was so late, she didn't feel like trying to rationalize it. I was sent back up to bed, and if you guessed, I didn't sleep that night, you'd be correct. This one still confuses me as to how and what. My dad enjoyed night fishing, so I'd go out with him at times on a lake to fish. He'd bring the boat out and paddle it around at different spots to try to catch fish. We had arrived around dusk, so there was still some light, and we remained out there well into the night. This is where it got spooky for me, especially since I hate the dark. I grew nothing but bored of the trip and just started looking about and messing with his binoculars. This is where I noticed the bright orbs appear far out in the distance, yet seemingly at two far corners of the lake. The issue was that they looked far too bright and close to the land to be stars. I pointed them out to my dad, who was just perplexed by it. Time seemed to just continue to pass, as the two orbs just never grew or shrank. Then I noticed things flying directly overhead, from left to right over the lake. The one I swear was those pointed light patterns, similar to the Phoenix lights. Oddly enough, it later flew back across the right to the left in the same pattern. Same lights. Now the weird part, the orbs of bright light suddenly moved after what seemed like hours of sitting in the distance, flying directly over our small boat. Only they weren't balls of lights or UFOs, but rather seemed to be airplanes. The first flew over, then sometime in a second. Now the entire odd thing was that both flew directly over our boat. The other odd thing was neither made a noise until they were directly above us. Before that, they were just bright balls of light, and only when directly above us did they sound and look like planes. I only live about 20 minutes from a small airport and around 40 minutes from a major one. I hear and see planes all the time. I can even see the light from the local airport's light tower at night from my development. This was nothing like that, and what makes it all odder was the area we were in where my father grew up and claimed to see many UFO sightings as a child. A second short story. The house next to my father's while he was a child had a stable with horses in it. One night the horses were going absolutely nuts, full-on panic mode basically. My father, his brother, and their mother went out to investigate with either a lantern or a flashlight. I can't recall the specifics on that. Either way, sure enough, there was a bright light being cast down into the stable from what appeared to be a ship. It hovered there silently, just emitting this bright light while the horses were freaking out. They shined the light onto the object, which caused it to actually drift toward them. And when they removed it, it went back to staying above the stable. More. My mom was on a return trip from Disney World when, I guess, somewhat famous UFO sightings happened around the New York Taconic back in the 80s. The only memory she has of it, however, is that there were cars parked all down the Taconic, with people out looking at the object, and her father refused to pull over. More stories? My father, like many other people used to, we'd go out and explore with their friends, or without. There were loads of old abandoned houses near him in the woods and up on the hills, so they'd go in and find old albums and Playboys. One trip, in the middle of the day, he had climbed up a small face of a cliff by pulling himself directly on to check out one of the houses. Sometime later, nearing dark, he began his descent and was going back at the same cliff and edge. He began to lower himself down when he happened to look up. Only right where he had just been was now a large, hairy creature. I want to say reddish hair. And it just looked down at him. He said he never ran so fast and so hard until he got home and darted right inside. I don't think he ever went back. I've got two events in my life that I find really creepy. One slightly creepier than the other, so I'll take that one first. My family has the opportunity to see the world a lot, fly to different countries and experience things most haven't, which is really nice. One time we flew out to the Dominican Republic, beautiful island split in two. One side is called Haiti, and the other one is the Republic. We went on a truck safari to see the natives who lived there. One of the guides came up to us personally and talked to my dad, quite worried in his tone. I wasn't so good at English at the time because I was quite young, so I really didn't understand. But he kept pointing at me and doing a gesture on his hair. My dad just shook his head and looked calm. Anyways, the tour carried on, and the guide kept peeking back at us, looking extremely nervous. We stopped at an old village. They were really nice, offered us fruit and water. The guide once again pulled my father aside and talked. As this happened, this really, really old lady came waddling from a small hut. She looked amazed at me. You know how a grandmother looks at its grandchildren the first time they see them? She came up to me and started brushing my hair with her fingers. I didn't think much of it at the moment. I had this glowingly blonde hair when I was little. Dad was blonde long into his 20s before it started going brownish. The thing is, after that day, my hair started to go rat-colored-ish, shifting tones in a matter of weeks. To the natives, blonde hair was synonymous with gods and immortals. It was looked upon and praised. I don't really believe so much in witchcraft, but that event really sent shivers down my spine. Second event, though, as I said, we were fortunate enough to travel a lot. Dad had managed to get us a 2-week trip to Thailand for a really good price. Dad had, and still is, quite the businessman, always eager to get a bargain, so we didn't have to spend too much on anything. We were going to take both the east and west side of the country, 1 week each. So the last week on the east side is running out. Dad makes his calls to the guy he was going to hire for the bus trip over. He knew the guy from work, so he's going to cost him less, of course. Cheap bastard. But the guy ends up a no-show. He gives us another number to call, and it's all fine and dandy. Dad arranges the trip, calls the hotel. The night before the trip, Dad gets the call that the guy is sick, and his fill-in is sick as well, unable to make the drive. My dad is furious at this point, cancels the other hotel, and demands another week at the one we're staying at this moment. The day later, everyone's in shock. The breakfast room is completely silent. Some people are in tears. Others try frantically to contact their loved ones to tell them they're okay. December 26, 2004 was the date, for those who don't know. The hotel we would have been in was completely leveled. I doubt we would be alive if we weren't so lucky. Probably gonna get buried, but oh well. About a year ago, my husband, then fiance, moved into our first apartment together. It was about 400 square feet, and it had one bathroom, one bedroom, a small kitchen, and an open living room. Our first month there, I get off a double shift at work, and I decided to take a long bubble bath. I get in the tub and kind of zone out, and when I snap out of it, I see a foot-long burgundy hair stuck in the shower wall. I have naturally light blonde hair, so it's not mine. It's definitely not my husband's, and no one else has showered in our bathroom. I immediately freak out, and my husband is just laughing the whole time because he hadn't done anything, yet he was still caught red-handed. I brushed it off, and we quickly forgot about it until 6 months later, when my younger sister decided to stay the night with me. We hung out all night, and she crashed on the couch while me and my husband slept in our bedroom. The next morning, I wake up at about 11 a.m. We decide to take a shower where, lo and behold, I find another foot-long burgundy hair. When I get out of the shower, my sister says, "Why did you take 2 showers this morning?" Shocked, I told her that I hadn't, and I'd only just taken the one I had just stepped out of. She replied, "Well, did your husband take one? Because I heard the shower going at about 8 this morning." I told her that my husband was still asleep, and we were both thoroughly freaked out. I woke my husband up and told him about the hair in the shower as well as my sister's story, and he laughed and told us to quit being paranoid. We had nothing else happen, and we moved out not too long after. When I was in middle school, I was spending my friend's birthday weekend at her grandparents' house, as I had done a million times before. For a bit more context, her house is outside of the city, in the far country. The only other house was her great-grandmother's, on the same property, a few yards away. The other side of the house was close to the tree line, and her backyard was huge, and at the end was nothing but dense forest. It could be really creepy at times. So the first night is her party, and a bunch of us stayed over. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was just standard eating junk food, staying up till we were laughing hysterically, and watching movies like all 13-year-old kids usually do. The second night is when it gets weird. When I was the only one staying the night again, it was about 3 a.m., and I dragged the lazy boy chair to the middle of the living room and was curled up in a blanket watching Family Guy. She had passed out on the floor a couple feet in front of me. All was well when I heard what sounded like a knock on her front window. My eyes shot over to the curtains, but they were closed so I couldn't see. I debated getting up to look, but something told me that was the last thing that I wanted to do. I waited a bit to see if I could hear it again, and started to relax when I didn't hear it again. Then, as clear as day, there was the knocking again, but a bit more fast-paced, or frantic, if you will. By this point, I freaked and covered my head with the blanket, praying it would stop. They banged a bit harder on the window, and I jumped out of my chair, started shaking my friend and screaming that someone was trying to get in. She woke up and I made her listen, but of course it stopped. so I forced her to stay awake and told her somebody was knocking at the window. Her response was, maybe it's my uncle, coming from my great-grandmother's to try to scare us. But didn't mention it again after I said it at 3 a.m. I laid back down, but beside her this time, and we listened. Just as she was falling asleep, I was still wide awake. The knocking started at the front door right beside us, and whoever started jiggling the knob and banging at the same time. We both flipped and ran upstairs to her grandparents' room. Her grandfather was out of bed so fast when we said someone was trying to get in. He ran outside through the back door where the knocking had moved to, while we were hysterically trying to explain what we heard. In nothing but his t-shirt and underwear in the middle of winter, he did a full check of the house. We heard him come back in and listened as he checked and locked every door and window as he went through the house. He came back in and told us that we were sleeping in their room with them that night, and he dragged the air mattress in from the living room. By this point, we were scared shitless and had to ask him who it was. He told us he just didn't find anything, no footprints, handprints, and nobody was around. There was basically no sign that anyone had been around at all. This was the first and only time we experienced anything like that at her house. Thinking back to it, it still gives me the heebie-jeebies like nothing else. Also, sorry if the formatting is a bit fucked and the spelling of some words. I'm on mobile and it comes to correct. And yes, it is very hard to read naturally. I have a few, and I'll share some of them. 1. My 2 older brothers, my dad and mom, were woken up on separate occasions by a disembodied woman's voice. She was sounding like my mom and called each person by their name, followed by, "It's time to wake up," at extremely odd times. My sister and I heard her while fully awake. My sister had headphones on at the computer, but no music. I was trying to sleep on the sofa bed when I heard a gasp and then my name in a loud whisper. We turned to each other and we were really confused, thinking we called on each other. The day my dad heard the voice, he was asleep on the couch, and I was listening to music on the same desktop computer headphones. I saw him wake up and go into the kitchen. My mom was there and told him to go back to sleep because she didn't wake him up. She was woken up on a non-work day and told it was time to go to work. That time, the voice was distinct and didn't sound like her. She said it sounded like an older woman. Nobody ever wakes my mom up because she had an alarm clock. She would normally wake us up for school or work. 2. Once my grandfather gave us an old antique school desk. We walked into the house after a family dinner at a buffet. One of my brothers and sisters saw a white human figure, like a mummy or ninja, leap into the air and dive under the desk. I saw it from the corner of my eye as I was taking off my coat. It was as if someone was scared to be seen. My brother was freaking out and grabbed a baseball bat and was looking around, but it disappeared. 3. Doorknob twisted and doorknob opened once while my sister and little brother playing with toys in my mom's room. Nobody behind the door. 4. Another time our parents weren't home. It was me, my sister, and little brother downstairs playing. We heard a woman scream upstairs loudly. We all grabbed baseball bats or large toys and tiptoed upstairs. We ultimately ended up backing off and just laughing about it. 5. Not sure 100% on this, if it's paranormal or something was wrong with my ears. One time my sister and I were getting ready for a Christmas Eve tradition to go to my grandparents' house. We were conversating. I was about 8 years old. The topic was normal and positive. I think we were talking about past family parties. I then randomly hear what sounds like her burst out crying and say, "It's all wrong." So my heart stopped and I looked over at her and she was still having normal conversation. She stopped and said, "What?" because I was looking at her in shock since I thought she burst into tears. I felt intense fear and dread after that. 6. I was playing with 3 balloons after a birthday party near the stairs. Little brother was staring up at the upstairs in horror. He was about 4 years old and I was 6. He then ran away screaming and crying because he saw a man in an elephant costume head at the top of the stairs. I made fun of him and told him that he was seeing things. Then shortly after bullying him and my mom consoling him in the kitchen, I walked back towards the stairs and all 3 balloons somehow flew straight up the stairs in a perfect line, and each one popped one at a time. The popped balloons somehow all landed in front of me at the bottom step. None of it made sense. I didn't look up the stairs. I was too young and I didn't think of anything, except that it was weird and impossible. I didn't believe in ghosts. My 2 older brothers also have a terrifying story of seeing people in Halloween costumes when they were little. I can't tell that story on here though. 7. That same antique desk was moved into my mom's room. There were no more white figures or anything abnormal happening, but because it was old, it would randomly make creaking noises, and having a big family in a small house, my sister and I shared this room with Mom. So it's years later, and I was a teen. There were several times when I was sleeping in the room and heard a rock being tossed onto the wall. Only happened when I slept on the opposite end of the room, across from the desk. I never could figure it out, but always had the need to look at the desk as if the desk threw a rock. There would also be no rock on the floor whenever I checked, just the sound. And this happened a lot. 8. This is the most recent and weirdest. Family vacation, excluding oldest brother. My dad passed away. I saw what may have been my brother's doppelganger upstairs at vacation home we rented. He was actually downstairs with entirely different clothes. I didn't see the face because he walked into the doorway as I was putting on makeup in the mirror and quickly spun around as I thought I was getting undressed. Then I was going toward the stairs and saw him standing in the room across from me. He had his back turned to me and was looking up at the ceiling with palms facing forward. Looked like he was either waiting for the rapture or just admiring the room. Never saw his face and just assumed it was my brother acting incredibly strange. I went straight downstairs to find out my brothers were downstairs, and nobody had a black short-sleeve hoodie and vest on. Also, that room was my younger brother's. So what in the heck was the older one doing there? He and his wife had a room downstairs. He just resembled the older brother. Another day, same vacation, I was lounging on this couch on the loft. I was covering my eyes with my forearm because I was too lazy to turn off the lamp. I looked at it and then covered my eyes again. I then heard it switch off by itself. The bulb didn't burn out. Another day, a wall photo in my older brother's room was on the floor all busted up when we got back from dinner. He and his wife investigated it and said it was weird because the windows were closed and there were no fans on. Someone would have had to lift it and throw it. Sister and Mom also claimed they heard footsteps on the loft when no one was there. Another day, I briefly saw someone walk into the upstairs bathroom and close the door. I had to go, so I went downstairs to the other bathroom. Once again, I find everyone was downstairs, but that bathroom occupied too. I told everyone my younger brother was in the upstairs bathroom, but stood corrected when they told me he was in this one, and he indeed walked out. Okay, so this is going to be a long one. I've never publicly shared this, just told a few friends about it over the years. But this is one that my boyfriend and I really don't talk about much because it's absolutely unbelievable, even for us still. So, here goes, I guess. To anyone that reads this and doesn't believe it, please don't feel the need to tell me. I lived it and still have a hard time believing that it even happened. I went to a concert with some friends one night. I believe it was early sometime around January 2016. We all had a really good time, nothing out of the ordinary. Once we came back, one of the people we'd gone with started passing out crystals and stones and stuff to look at. This dude brought out this amethyst crystal that was over like 300 years old, and it was passed down in his family for generations. Really awesome stuff. I don't know what the hell happened next, but one of the girls grabbed the amethyst to look at it, and as soon as it met her fingers, her entire facial expression changed. Her eyes were like black, super dilated, wild. She started sneering at all of us and talking like backwards. 2 people had to leave because they couldn't stop throwing up almost instantaneously after her demeanor changed. She stood up and started saying weird stuff. We almost thought it was a possession case, but she seemed very aware the entire time. She started talking about how someone in the group was cheating on her with another girl who was there, in the room with us. The whole thing got super awkward and honestly terrifying. Things were moving around the house, doors were slamming by themselves. She seemed to be the person who was making it happen, but it seemed paranormal. A few of us eventually moved to another room to talk about some stuff. As we were all trying to figure out what to do, one of our friends, the one I'd mentioned earlier, who was apparently cheating on her, said that they had thought the girl was crazy, and just as she said this, a huge chunk of ice or icicles fell from the top of our roof directly onto the top of his windshield, shattering it. Once things died down for the night, we were all about to try to sleep. Come to find out, we're supposed to share a room with this girl. Nope. We sat awake upstairs on the 2nd floor. She was on the 1st floor, and heard a ton of weird noises coming from her downstairs. Metal scraping, fingers tapping on the table, hysterical crying, and then immediate laughter. And then something completely different. We thought everything was over. Maybe she had fallen asleep. My boyfriend pulls up his Facebook account to check to see if any of our friends had posted anything about the crazy night. The first post on his news feed was a post from her, from 5 minutes earlier. It read, "Congratulations, you've awoken the dragon." While reading those words, we literally hear the words like a big fucking ass reptile, like a croc or something, walking up the stairs. Like there are heavy, padded, rough footsteps, stepping side by side, slowly up the stairs. I cannot explain to this day, and I have chills writing this. This girl played some damn Jedi mind tricks on us, I swear. The thing that creeped us out even more about the dragon thing was that she literally carried around a little stuffed lizard toy that she named Jerry Garcia, after the singer. Go figure. We muddled up the courage to peer over the side of the staircase, as the thing was just about to hit the top 2 steps, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing. We felt completely insane. We stayed in that spot and didn't move for the rest of the night. Eventually, the downstairs noises ended as well, and everything was silent. We crept downstairs after we felt that we were safe to do so. Whether it was a paranormal experience, some black voodoo magic, or just dealing with someone completely off their rocker, we didn't know. All we knew was that we were terrified and didn't feel safe that night. When we finally got back downstairs and looked at everything, it was weird. The girl was gone. All the cabinets were open. All of the doors, including the basement and outside front door, were all open. Which could have been terrible because we had 3 indoor cats at the time. We also found a bunch of weird memorabilia and relics in the basement a while after. I left some bits and pieces out because I'd literally be writing this for hours if I told the entire story from beginning to end. There are just a few main highlights, and the things I can remember super vividly. As if this just happened a few days ago anyway. This event was over the course of an entire night, not just a few hours, and there was so much that happened. It was also about 6 years ago now, so the timeline leading up to all this scary shit, it's a little bit hazy these days. Thanks to whoever decided to read this whole thing. Sorry if it's hard to follow. I don't really like reliving the event because it honestly brings back some really unsettling feelings. If anyone has ever been through something similar, or has heard any people go through something like this, please tell me. First, sorry for the bad English, as it's not my main language. My story starts in my original country of Sudan, an African country. I go there every summer with my family, and my father would make me work in his farm to learn how he was living before he left to go to the country. So after a long day working, I return to the village, and it's about an hour and a half ride on the donkey. And after resting and chatting with my friends, I wanted to check my phone and see if I had any new messages. But I find I didn't have any. So I searched in the village. I realized that I'd forgot it on the farm, so I take the donkey and go to the farm in the night. The way between the village and the farm is a desert, and there's no building or anyone out there. In the middle of the road, I feel the start of a sandstorm, like a strong wind and sand smell, and decided to continue to the farm. Suddenly, the donkey stopped moving and began to make fear sounds and started kicking and jumping. I thought that maybe there was a snake or a wolf, but I couldn't see anything. Because of the sandstorm, the donkey's jumping and I fall from his back, and the donkey ran away. So in the middle of the desert with no light and a sandstorm, I was in a bad situation. I saw a light far away, and I think it must be from some desert people that will give me shelter till the sun came back. I went there, and after a long walk, I reached a house and knocked on the door. An old man opened the door, and I immediately felt weird about him, but just ignored, and I asked to stay with them until the day. He let me in and gave me food and sat down with me, and his son was there. His son didn't even look at me and just started eating when I heard the man saying, "Do not say it, do not say it." And as a Muslim, we say, Bismillah, before eating, which means in the name of God. So I said it, and just when I said it, the whole house vanished, and the food and the people, and I found myself in a ruined corral, in a ruined corral. And instead of the food, it was an old spike plant and some animal facets. And the sandstorm stopped. I was so scared and ran to the farm without getting tired and found the donkey there. I took my phone and the donkey and went back to the village. Before I was born, my entire family and extended family, uncles, aunts, cousins, all went to the beach one day for a picnic in Pakistan. Now, I don't know the exact details. However, back in the day, the smugglers used to bring in the electronics from various countries to resell them via boats. And they would park the boats at the beach. Now, from what I've always been told, and I don't know how, if somebody does, please shed some light, as I'm always curious. They used to dig holes or something similar during the low tides, so when it was full, it would create sort of a vortex and some inward pressure. That would help keep the boat steady in that spot as they unloaded. However, once completed, they'd leave, leaving the hole in the ground. So back to the picnic. As everyone arrives, 20 plus people, the kids get out of the cars and run straight into the ocean. As they enter, they start getting sucked into that hole. One after another screams, and everyone is trying to save each other, and one after the other they keep going in. Eventually, 14 members of my family drowned and died there in a matter of minutes. It was an absolute catastrophe and extremely tragic. However, the haunting, the paranormal part of it comes next. Everyone used to live in a massive house all together. Think of 4 stories, huge-ass old-styled house. So now imagine all of a sudden 14 people gone, dead. It became extremely depressing and empty, that place. One of the floors was completely closed off as the entire family living there had died. After a few years, it became extremely common and frequent to hear kids playing on that floor. Or you'd hear, every other night, footsteps of someone walking in, putting on slippers and going upstairs. You could stand there and hear it clear as daylight. I recall a very clear incident. I was sitting on the ground floor lobby, a long hobby with doors on each side, with a mirror at the end and a swing in the middle next to the kitchen door. My mom was in the kitchen and I was sitting in the swing facing the mirror. As I see 2 kids peek out one of the rooms and then run into the adjacent room. I asked my mom if we had guests over, and she said no one is over. I explained why I asked. She pulled me to the kitchen and explained that day that it's common to see the kids, however not to engage them or go towards them, and to mind my own business. It became extremely common for us to spot these things as we lived there, but no harm was done. Once my tutor came home sitting in my room, and I'd always close the door to my room, and there were no distractions. Once he came about, and he was sitting facing the door, which I had left open as I was alone at home, he mentioned to me midway if I could close the door, as my family was walking around and it was a bit distracting. I told him no one is home, which he didn't believe, until I took him out and showed him around the whole house and floor. He absolutely freaked out and immediately left and stopped tutoring me unless I went to his place. I moved to Saudi Arabia after that and saw a lot of things growing up, but thankfully I'm not scared of such things or experiences, so I don't get freaked out. But I'd imagine most people would get really freaked out. When you live in the desert, you see things that you can't explain. It's creepy sometimes. So we bought a brick house back in 2012 and fixed up the inside, and the roofing was replaced. Well, nothing happened for a while in the home, but little things started happening, like the oven knob cutting itself off. Funny, because it never did it till then. To very strange basement sounds. One night while hanging out in the living room around 11:30 with my mom watching TV, one of her poodles she had named Cupid, for no reason, started growling into the kitchen, and nothing was in there. Then he started growling at the hallway door, then the door leading to the room in front of the hallway entrance. I picked him up to show him nothing was there. I walked him to the hallway. He flipped out, managed to jump from my arms, and ran back into the couch with my mother. We were visibly confused by what just took place. Many other things happened too. One time, my mother and one of my younger brothers were hanging out in the kitchen. One night while they were playing Sims 3 or 4 on her laptop, and they said they heard what sounded like a dog kennel scraping across the floor in the sunroom. And when they looked, nothing had been moved. One time I was laying in bed like 1 a.m., I'd say in the morning, laying there minding my own business, but was completely scared half to death when someone super loud bangs and they went off. What sounded like gunshots outside my window or in my room. I wasn't the only one who heard it either. My sister in the next room did, and she was shooken up by it. I threw my covers over my head in fear before I dared get up. Well, it just so happened that these very same really loud bangs happened again a few times. The second time I heard it, I think, the third time it woke everyone up, and my father actually scanned all the house and outside it with his pistol because he thought somebody was actually shot. Keep in mind, whatever this sound was, it sounded like a gunshot and it was loud, and he found nothing? With everyone in confusion and shooken up, I don't remember sleeping that night. And one night, my sister was in the kitchen and she found the chair in the middle of the room in the kitchen. She thought the boys got it and moved it, so she moved it back. Well, as she left the kitchen into the hallway, the chair started to move back across the kitchen, and she didn't care to run back in there. This happened a few more times with that chair, sometimes being knocked over. We'd hear sounds like footsteps coming up from the basement with no one there. It always felt like you were being watched, with no eyes. Our attic, we didn't know we had. You would hear sounds from it, but we passed it off as maybe rats or something. One time my oldest brother was over, and he was hanging out, and we all heard knocking coming from the ceiling light taps above. The basement lights would cut themselves off at random when they were on. One night I was laying in bed around maybe 11. I heard heavy boots come up to my bed and then leave. I first thought one of my brothers put on my boots. Then they were in the living room and my boots were in the room next to the closet, I believe, or maybe the sunroom. After a minute, I got up and asked who came into my room to check if I was asleep. They all looked confused and said no one has been. I was then met with a chilly feeling all over me. My sister's dog Molly would growl at her room closet many times, and it would freak my sister out. One time, me and my brother were playing Terraria on 360, minding our own business, having some fun, and her sister came up from her room and asked who knocked on her frame beside the door. We told her we haven't been in her room, which was pretty much confirmed by itself. That knock happened a few times again. Want to hear some crazy parts? Well, one of the beds that was in the place had light blood stains on one of the bed sheets, along with additional info the neighbors told us about the place. She said the man who owned the place had shot himself in the basement. They said it took him 3 or 4 shots to the head to actually kill him because they missed vital spots in the head, and the last shot did the trick. We were never told who the old man was, but he was a drunken, half-crazy man, and he killed himself in the basement. And the bangs we heard made more sense after hearing that. Though the old man's suicide was years after we bought the place, at the moment, this is all I can remember. I don't have a lot of memory to it, or my head it just maybe isn't letting me. You don't have to believe any of it, because I know what happened, and I never want to see that place again. It still runs through the back of our mind sometimes. When I first moved out of my parents' house, I lived in an old but recently renovated annex building on a farm. I was the first person to live in this building. It was really old and looked like it could have been maybe an old pig shed. The farm was also really old, and there were remnants of an old priory about 50 meters from the farmhouse and an annex, which also had an old excavated graveyard. One of the skeletons is our local town museum, as it's the tallest man who ever lived in my local area. Weird stuff happened pretty much from the day I moved in. Orbs and photos, unexplained thumps and bangs, all the usual ghost stuff. The annex was really small, a tiny shower and a toilet. Then there's a tiny kitchen, then a living room, then a bedroom. Each room had its own door. One day I was in the shower, and when I got out and went to the kitchen, all the cupboards were open. Twice, I had opened a kitchen cupboard and had a glass and mug fly out, as in literally fly out and hit the wall behind me. If I ever fell asleep on the sofa in the living room, I would be woken up by a man's voice angrily shouting, "Hello!" at me. My TV would turn on in the night. My phone would randomly start playing music for no reason. I had my best friend stay over one day after we had both been out drinking. We were both hungover, and she went to my bed in the bedroom while I was zonked out on the sofa. She shouted at me, "For fuck's sake, stop walking around. Why can't you sit down?" And I was sitting down. I couldn't hear the footsteps, but she definitely could. I would also lose things in my bedroom all the time, jewelry and makeup. A new lady started at my workplace, and little did I know she's a bit psychic. I'd never spoken to her about where I live or the stuff that happened in my house all the time. But one day, totally out of the blue, she told me there's a woman who likes to come to my house and play. She really likes the teddy on my bedside table. Honest to God, there's no way she could have known this. She went on to say the woman is from a long time ago and has learning difficulties, and the monks used to look after her. At this point, my mind was totally and utterly blown, but she told me to buy her a teddy and put it next to my one bedside table. I was skeptical, but willing to give anything a go because I hated living there so much. I was so scared and freaked out so often, so I did, and everything stopped. Here's the thing. For my story, we need to go a bit into very localized Scottish folklore. So I went to a boarding school called Gordonstown in Scotland. The school is built in what used to be the residence of the Gordon family. We were lesser Scottish nobles. Most famously, there is a man named Sir Robert Gordon, a third baronet, who was referred to as the Wizard of Gordon. He had an interest in alchemy and the occult. He built a round building known as Round Square, where local folk from Elgin and Doofus believed he conducted his magical experiments. They said he sold his soul to the devil and built a round building so that the devil couldn't hide around the corners. One night, a devil came to claim his soul, and he trapped it in stone at the center of the square. Eventually, the devil came on Hallows Eve and took his soul, and the wizard was no more. Anyway, when I was boarding my school in the house in the round square, we lived in the literal round house where Robert Gordon supposedly trapped a devil in stone at the center of it. On Halloween night, me and my floor mates went to the school dance. On our way back, we were talking about the legend of the wizard. So legend has it that if you took the rock that sat on top of the stone in the center of the square and knocked 3 times, the devil in it would come out. So we decided to see who's brave enough to do it. Not because we thought the devil would come out, but because if you walked in the grass at the center of the square, the seniors would beat the shit out of you. Weird tradition. Anyway, I was the dumbass who decided to knock on the stone, and nothing happened. So I ran back before any seniors could see me, and we all hung out and chatted. We had some sweets, and we went to bed. Around 3 a.m, I woke up, and I was completely paralyzed. I could only move my eyes, and I saw on the floor of my room something crawling up to me, moving ever so slowly towards me, slowly making its way to my bed, climbing on the stairs at the foot and crawling on top of me. I could feel its weight on my legs, then my chest blowing all the air out of my lungs, creeping all the way to my face, where I could smell its breath and see only that it was a mouth without a face. I could see its teeth. I wanted to yell, but I couldn't. I couldn't even breathe. I was suffocating. Then suddenly I felt a rush of air sweep my lungs, and I yelled to wake up my roommate. As soon as I let out the sound, the thing was gone. This coming from me won't sound really thrilling or believable because I was not directly impacted in these stories, but these 2 stories that I have, they actually convinced me that there is something that is still unknown to us. I'm an atheist, but remembering these conversations never failed to give me chills. Even now as I'm typing, I'm getting goosebumps. Story 1. When I was a kid, must be like 10 or 12 or something, I had this guy, P, in my neighborhood, 4 years older than me. We used to play together, and he would tell us these stories about how he used to see fire in certain areas of his house, and the visuals stopped when his grandfather got some holy rituals done in the house. But back then, I never really believed him. A few years later, we were all grown up and adults, and P's mom accidentally caught fire in the kitchen. P's elder brother tried to save her, got his hands burned in the process. No one knows how it happened. And after being in the hospital for 2 or 3 days, she succumbed to her injuries. And at that time, we didn't have those childhood stories in our recollection. And then later that year, we all friends were just having a late night walk and talking about ghost stories, just joking around trying to scare each other. And P was all quiet and listening. And all of a sudden he says, "Do you remember I told you I used to see fire in my house? See how my mom died?" Story 2. Same neighborhood. There's another friend of mine, T. T's dad was an alcoholic, and you can imagine all the bad things that alcoholism comes with to exist in T's life. They were extremely poor. He's doing great now because he's super dedicated and very humble. But then his dad got diagnosed with tuberculosis. He was hospitalized and things were bad. Now in the apartment below T's apartment, there lives a family who has this mentally challenged man in his late 40s or early 50s. He's not married. Family because we have a culture of joint families, and he rarely steps out of the house. So one morning around 5 a.m., while T's father was hospitalized, this old man knocks on T's door. T opened the door, and the man said, "Why aren't you ready yet? Go get ready and visit your dad for the last time." That was the day T's father died in the hospital. And he later told me about the incident. Both these stories are so convincing to me because I know these guys, and I don't think they would lie about something relating to losing their parent.